thinking about what our overall purpose is, what our end goals are as a group. For one, here's radiation, and we think we're sure it's possible for us to have radiation measurements from all over the world, from every country, covering a lot of those countries. It may take years, but at the rate we're going, maybe it'll only take 2 years to get what's called a baseline. What is normal? What is the radiation like now? That's one step, baseline radiation. Once we have that, to use the same system to gather information about other environmental pollutants, other issues. For instance, PM 2.5, and again, it could be many other pollutants. Also, to get a set of global measurements of this that's crowdsourced, independent. And this, I have to say, these are one kind of practical goal. These are targets for the data collection side. But if we wanted to say what is the meta purpose, the bigger purpose, it's how can we teach people to make a community that can do this kind of stuff? It's about building communities with all of these ethical and social and other standpoints for openness, for data sharing, for creativity, for innovation. How do you build a group and grow a community to do this stuff independently? So I would just call this the meta purpose. Meta purpose. How to make this kind of community. My writing's terrible. And this kind of community is global, international, inclusive, active, participatory. We say always open, always on, always researching, always learning. This is the kind of communities that we want to see more and more of all over the world. Because we have lots of things that we need to do, that need to be done, problems need to be tackled, that this is probably the best way to do it now. So this is, I want to say, sort of 2 levels to what Safecast is all about. And the radiation measurement has been, for us, a very, very successful test of the principle of this kind of open online community for doing citizen science and citizen information gathering. And like I said, much more successful and much more accepted by the experts than we ever dreamed would be possible. So, anyway, yes, questions or anybody want to talk about something? Excuse me while I drink my coffee.
So, please feel free to ask anything.
日本語でもいいですよ。大丈夫ね。みんな分かったかな。じゃあもう一回最初から日本語でやろうか。Yeah. Yes.
I think you mentioned about radiation on sea.
Yes.
Like you provide some information about sea radiation, but how do you get that?
Okay, that's a good question. He's asking about measuring radiation in the sea. Ourselves, we have a small amount of measurements that people have taken on boats, for instance. And of course, radiation in the ocean in general is very, very low compared to on the land, right? Even off Fukushima. We are experimenting with making big IGs that can go underwater, and the tests are okay. We have some more tests coming up soon for that. Because, particularly off of Fukushima, the radiation that's been sort of coming out from Fukushima, a lot of it has contaminated the ocean floor, the seabed. And there are researchers and scientists who are measuring that and taking surveys. And it would be nice to be able to find some way to send detectors down to the bottom to measure it. Measuring water itself is very technically challenging. There are machines that maybe cost $20,000 that can give you an idea, but there's a researcher from the Woods Hole Institute in the United States in Massachusetts named Ken Bissler. He's been studying radiation for about 20 or 30 years in the ocean. He's a specialist. There's a lot of specialists doing this. And has been very active in Fukushima. And he talked about his lab's detectors, the ones that they need, cost like $80,000. And it takes more than a day to measure it. So, but you get a very, very, very sensitive reading. And in fact, if it's not that sensitive, you won't find anything. And this is the situation. So we like to, we stay in touch with Ken Bissler, and he actually made his own crowd-funded project to measure radiation in the ocean off North America. So Washington State, California, etc. And it's really neat. I mean, people pay about $600, and it's usually a group, a local community group will do that, and they get this big plastic jug, which they fill with the ocean water, and it has a temperature sensor and other things, and they close this up and they send it back to him. And he puts it in his machine and measures it. So this is the kind of thing we need to do more of. And again, in terms of the United States, there are several agencies in the United States or in Canada which you would think would be the people to do these measurements. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is one. Local state governments are others. But generally, they don't have the budget for it. And they don't have the manpower either. So this is why Dr. Bissler came up with his project, because he couldn't get the funding either. So it's necessary. But I've done a lot of research on the ocean. Maybe we can talk later if you want. The ocean contamination is gradually going across the Pacific. You may be, if I said the radiation level of cesium within the next couple of years will double what it was before, you might be very surprised to hear that. But it was very low, and maybe I can show you a map later, but I'll just throw some numbers. Before the Fukushima disaster, because of nuclear testing, there was lots of cesium in the Pacific Ocean. And right before the disaster, the level was about 2 becquerels per cubic meter all over the Pacific. And after the disaster in the ocean near Japan, it went up to maybe 100,000 becquerels per cubic meter near Japan, but quickly, within a couple of weeks, became less and less and less and less and less, and even now off Japan, it's not much more than about 2 or 4. When the radiation in the Pacific doubles, it'll go up to about 4 becquerels per cubic meter, right? And I know you're writing it down. Even now, in the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, it's about 60 becquerels per cubic meter. The Irish Sea is over 50. The Black Sea is also very high. They have been over 100 not too long ago. And this is from the Chernobyl accident. And also there's a nuclear facility called Sellafield in the United Kingdom that was leaking into the Irish Sea for years and years and years and years. So even after the Fukushima accident in the Pacific, it's going to double, and that's not good. I mean, who could say that's good? But it'll still be a lot less than the oceans around Europe even now, which people have a hard time believing, but it's true. Anyone else?
Further questions, please.
Yes.
Have you collaborated with any decontamination NGOs or NPOs?
You know, we're really interested in decontamination, right? And we've done a big report on it and on our blog, and we went through to look at, you know, when they were first figuring out how to decontaminate. They started with about 12 test locations all over Fukushima, and we got their data. We found where, and it was hard to find. Actually, I called up the Environment Ministry, and they eventually told me where to find it. I found the measurements before and after. And then my colleague Joe Moros and I went to the same places. Actually, we only went to like 3 of them, and took our own measurements, and we compared. So we're trying to judge how effective it is. And it's clear, in some cases, if the radiation level was very high, the decontamination can be very effective. It can lower it by half or more, but it still won't be low enough. If the level was low, it doesn't lower it as much, but you know, it can be down to the level where people can probably live there. But I think you know about what's called the half-life of radiation. The half-life of cesium is about, cesium-137 is about 30 years. The half-life of cesium-134 is 2 years. It means if you wait 2 years, half of the cesium-134 is gone. And if you're decontaminating in 2011, 2012, and you're only reducing it by half, it would probably just be better to wait. Cheaper, etc. So this is kind of the issues. Now, the decontamination now in Fukushima, depending on the areas that were evacuated, that is managed by the central government in Tokyo through the Environment Ministry. In the areas that were not evacuated, like Koriyama, Fukushima City, etc., those are managed by each of those municipal governments. They do very similar things. Well, we thought it would be really good if groups like us were allowed to go in and check and verify, you know, what the radiation levels are. And in 2012, maybe it was 2013, there was kind of a scandal and a newspaper article, you know, about bad practices for decontamination, and then the government said, we're going to redo our guidelines. And one of the things they said was, we're going to allow third-party groups to come in and verify. We'll have third-party monitoring. Well, that sounded great. A couple months later, I was at an exhibition, the same one called RadiX going on, and I talked to someone from the Environment Ministry. And he was very nice, and I said, we want to do third-party verification. And he said, you know, I don't think that's really happening yet. I said, yeah, okay, well, you know, who do we talk to? We want to do that. You know, I just don't know if it's happening. It wasn't happening. And just about 3 weeks ago, I was in Fukushima City, and there's a place called the Josen Joho Plaza, the Decontamination Information Plaza. It's, you know, this place where people can go to find out. And there's, again, very nice Environment Ministry staff, and we show them what we're doing, and I said, you know, we'd like to do third-party verification. And he said, you know, I don't think that's happening yet. More than a year later, right? And actually before that, back in January or March, I talked to somebody. Again, they said, yeah, no, I just don't think it's happening. And I asked the guy in Fukushima, I said, so what, do you think we should talk directly to the Tokyo head office of Environment Ministry? He said, yeah, you probably should, but I think the end result would be no, it's not happening. And I understand a bit of this because, you know, TEPCO has all of this contaminated water at the power plant. It's in these tanks, you know, and they have water. They're doing a bypass to take water from the mountains and send it out to the ocean. And the fishermen opposed it because they don't want radioactive water to go into the ocean. They finally agreed once the government promised to have third-party verification. And they found a laboratory, an official laboratory, that would do that. And that laboratory was probably acceptable both to the government, to TEPCO, and to the fishermen's groups. So the problem is, what kind of organization will be acceptable to everybody to do this? And there's not enough. And like I said earlier, we have no ideology. We hope to be acceptable, but I think they just haven't decided who to do it. And if the citizens aren't demanding it, which it doesn't look like they are, then they have no motivation to do it. So that's a long answer. The short answer was no. We don't have any collaboration with people doing decontamination, but we follow it, we stay in touch, we talk to people doing it a lot, you know, and are trying to, you know, look at what the results are going to be. Okay? Yeah. Someone else? How many of you have been to Fukushima? Yeah? Yeah. What do you do when you go?
Just sightseeing.
Sightseeing? Do you go with a group?
With my family.
With your family? Was it recent? I mean, since the disaster, before the disaster. Okay, since the disaster, have you gone? And what did you do?
Well, I actually went with a study group with University of Tokyo.
Okay.
We were able to go to Okumaken.
Right.
And they gave us a lecture, and also they allowed us to walk around with their radiation detectors.
Who did it? The university did?
We collaborated with, I think, Tohoku University.
Tohoku Dai?
Yeah. And so they said everything was, you know, don't post anything on Facebook or anything, and so this was very private.
When was that?
This March.
Okay. And you went to Okuma, you said? Yeah. What did you think?
It was, I expected that it was going to be deserted and everything, but
Yeah.
and it was as it was expected, but I felt it more when I went there.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of bags of
Right.
because they check every branch, they check every house, and wherever that has even like a dust of high radiation, they scrape that and put it in the black bags.
Yeah.
So they didn't know what they were going to do with that, and they also took 5 centimeters of soil of all the farms.
Yeah.
And they were still trying to figure out where they were going to get all the soils back.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of good information when you went.
and I'm also going this November to collaborate for research too.
Mm-hmm. In which town?
Also in Fukushima. I don't know the details yet. But,
Yeah. Yeah, the decontamination, just to touch on that. So the decontamination process, like she's describing, they cut down lots of trees and bushes and cut down the grass, and they take dirt off the ground, and they're scrubbing the buildings and taking that mud and that dirt and putting it in bags. And they need a place to store that for a long time. Again, we talked about the half-life of cesium. So they have a plan to have what they call an interim storage facility to store it for 30 years. And the most logical place to put that contaminated dirt and leaves and branches and everything is in places in Fukushima that are already so contaminated that people can't live there. And this is a very logical idea. And that means places like Futaba and Okuma. And just recently, within the last couple of weeks, the local towns finally agreed. Of course, the national government paid a lot of money, and they'll compensate the people who own the land, and they have laid out, they've given maps now. I just found these maps, I'll be writing about this soon, if I'll draw it over here. So here's the coastline, and here's Daiichi here, and Okuma's down here, and Futaba's up here, and here's Route 6 goes up, the Highway 6 goes up along there. And basically, an area like this around Daiichi will be the interim storage facilities. And this is about 14 kilometers. So it's really big. It's really big. And based on what they're saying, they're dividing it into several categories of debris. Dirt that is more than 8,000 becquerels per kilogram will go into one kind of, place to be buried, and waterproofed, and et cetera, and covered up with clay and then grass growing on, and they'll leave that for 30 years. And then the ones that's less than 8,000 will be similar, but not quite as much protection. And then things like the trees and the branches and the leaves, they're going to burn them. They'll have what's called, incinerators, shokyakujo, and they'll burn that to reduce the volume. And then they'll take the ash. When they incinerate this stuff, the ash is very radioactive. And this is a problem all over. I mean, even in Chiba, even in Tokyo, lots of radioactive ash. And no really good place to put it. So they're planning to build these concrete buildings half underground, and that this acts as radiation shielding, and put this ash in these big special drum cans in these buildings for 30 years. And then they'll be purifying water, et cetera, et cetera. So this is going to be a total radioactive waste processing town. It's big, it's 14 kilometers. Now, the government promised, and as you saw in Fukushima, they just have the bags of this stuff stacked up in every town in what they call short-term storage. They'll pay a farmer to use his field, and they'll stack it up, and they're everywhere. And they promised that they would only store it in this way for 3 years. Well, 3 years have already passed since they've started. So it's time to start moving this stuff.
They started this last year, though.
Depending on which part of town you're thinking of, which part, but there are parts in Fukushima where the decontamination started in like fall of 2011, and certainly in the beginning of 2012. So it's going to be 3 years soon. This facility, they haven't started to build it yet. And they're still talking to the general, because it was just finally decided politically within the last month, basically. So it's not started to be built. But they promised to move all these bags, or start moving them. So what are they going to do? They're going to start moving bags and probably just put them, somehow in a very, very temporary place out here in Futaba or something, until they can start preparing these underground and covered storage. So it's going to take a long time. And we really want to have, our fixed sensors, a lot of fixed sensors around this area. Depending on which direction the wind blows, when they're dumping out dirt, is it going to blow, is it going to cause radiation to go to the rice fields, etc. We want to be able to know that. So it's going to be a long time. Yeah. Anybody else go to Fukushima? Yes, you?
Just another question.
Sure.
今までやっておられて困難なことだったり、あるいは失敗したこと、節ガス何か失敗したこと、もう一つの質問はプロトニウムとストロンチウムについて
ね。そう。最初は心配したことが失敗。失敗するわけないですよ。失敗が多いですね。何でやっても特に失敗というか、物作るとき、日本語でいいかな、大丈夫。物作るとき、新しいもの作るときにもちろん全部すぐ、表通りに動かないから、そのプロセスが失敗が多いです。それがそういうものですよ。 実は私たちのスローガン、これがうちの、伊藤浄一さんのスローガンですね。Fail faster。だから早く失敗した方がいい。ね、だんだん早く失敗して、で、いつか成功する。それが多いです。他の失敗って今のところで私特にないと思う。難しいところは多いよ。どうしてもグループはもう人間関係ですね。人間関係。例えば政府とか誰かと話す時のそういう関係とコミュニケーションの難しさもある。これはちょっと違うんですけど、よく福島に行きますね。私が一番よく行くじゃないんですよ。他の人もっと行くんですけど、もちろん福島に住んでるボランティアも結構いる。さっき話したね、フィックセンサーが南相馬の下の小高というところに設置した時に非常に悲しかった。だからさっき彼女おっしゃったように、もう誰もいない。もうその幼稚園に入って子供たちの粘土細工とかちゃんと乾くようにテーブルに置いてある名前書いてあるとか、それでみんなの歯ブラシとかね、布巾とか名前書いてあって、もうすぐ戻ると。実は地震だからもう避難したでしょ、出たんですよ。ですぐ戻れると思ったんですよ。でも戻らないって3年間で、そこに入って悲しい。そして近所がその建物教会とそのうちが平気だったけど、周りがもうそのままで崩れてしまった。そのままの建物が多かった。で誰も片付けてないんですよ、3年間で。どうしますかっていうこと。この重さって感情的な重さがもう誰でも感じるんですよ。そういう人間の悲劇だから感じます。それを感じる。私にとってはそれ一番個人的に難しいところですよ。次の質問がストロンチウム、プルトニウム。ご存知と思うんですけれども、センサーはいろいろありますね。私たちガイガーカウンターで使ってますね。それが実はガマ線もベータ線もアルファ線も全部測ることできるんですけど、どっちかというとベータ線に一番敏感。だけどほとんど我々心配しているもの、セシウムとか、一番多いのはセシウムとか、そのガマ線とか心配してるから、それが一番測るようになってるんですよ。大体誰でもどこでもそうですけど、ストロンチウムもプルトニウムもありますね。ストロンチウムがたくさんのデータありますが、セシウムよりそんなにたくさん測っていない。その測る機会がとっても高いんですから。で時間かかる。ほとんど一晩ぐらい10時間とか、食べ物の中のストロンチウム知りたいならかなり苦労するんですよ。結構科学的には難しい。セシウムとか他の放射線なら100万ぐらいの機械でも、40万でもあるかもしれない。あるボランティア団体がドネーションで買えるぐらいのレベルでできるから多いですよ。だからストロンチウムあるんですが、ほとんどのデータがそのセシウムの 1% 以下、1000分の1から100分の1ぐらいですよ。大体どこでもそう。たまに何かの条件であるところ、ある通知、もしかしたらある魚に10分の1ぐらいも出るかもしれない。だけどほとんど 1% 程度、1% 以下だから、そういうふうに考えている。それがリスクはないわけないけど、でもセシウムが例えばもう100ベクレルだったら、じゃあストロンチウム1ベクレル以下じゃないかということですね。そういうふうに考えて、もちろんアルファ線もあるし、いろいろな違いもありますから、リスクが高いかもしれないけど、これは一つの大きな課題ですよ。今からどうやってもっとストロンチウムのデータ、もっとたくさん集まるか、どうやってやるか。私たちはこういう小コスのディテクターではできないですね。これがずっとそういう 謎とかデータの物足りなさがずっとあるんですね。いいですか？ I hope everyone understood. Should I repeat in English? No? Good? Yeah. So who else has gone to Fukushima? Or has anyone been to Chernobyl? Has anyone ever been to a nuclear power plant? You? Which one?
Yeah, it was in Germany, in Munich, in our university, we had kind of test.
Oh, a research reactor.
Facility.
Yeah.
And in Fukui, where I lived for 15 years,
Oh.
in Tokyo,
Yeah.
I think 2 times I had a kind of promotion tour to visit one of the nuclear facilities.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is still a big issue. As you know, you've probably been following it. The reactors in Fukui, you know, if there was ever an accident like Fukushima, and depending on where the wind goes, I mean, this will affect Shigaken, it can affect a lot of places, different prefectures, the evacuation plans. You know, it's hard to come up with an effective evacuation plan for that eventual, you know, problem. So it's an issue, and Fukui particularly has quite a few, you know, reactors there. What can we do? Hope for the best?
Yeah, I mean, I was concerned, this is my reason why Professor Brown is here today, because I got a device, a bigger one than this one, from Safecast in Tokyo while I was still living in Fukui.
You did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And then I measured all the vicinities of the power plants there on a day tour, just to make sure I'm in a kind of reasonably safe environment there.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. And that's when you got to know Peter.
Yes.
Right, right. And that was in 2012 or 2000?
Yeah, I think maybe early 2012.
Right, right. So if we look on the map, some of the Fukui data is yours, around the power plants.
Yes.
You didn't go to Ishikawa?
No, it's not up there.
Right, right. Interesting. Yeah.
There's one facility there, I think everybody knows about. It's a fast breeder reactor, which is loaded with a special kind of fuel called MOX fuel. It's a mixture of different kind of radioisotopes, including plutonium, I think.
Yeah.
And it has a special technical system inside for cooling, which is not just water cooling as you have in all the reactors, the boiling water reactors in Fukushima, but they want to have a more efficient cooling system with a coolant, the cooling agent, which can take up more heat and transport out. And they decided liquid sodium would be the best to have. And so in the primary cooling cycle, the liquid sodium is circulating, but it's known to everybody, I think, since high school days. If pure sodium comes in contact with water, you have a very fast oxidation, a very fast burning, etc. So if the cycle ever is kind of hurt, pipes get old or broken in an earthquake or anything, and just come in contact with water, then there will be a big disaster. And not only releasing the isotopes which came out in Fukushima, but most likely releasing plutonium in sizable quantities as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Have you heard of the Takagi Fund? There's a foundation started by a nuclear physicist named Takagi who passed away, and he was working on the plutonium fuel cycle. That was his research. I don't know, I think he might have been at Kyoto University, I'm not sure. And gradually as he was working, he decided that this was a terrible idea. And then began to try to exert influence so that this would not be used and not be done. And he started a foundation which donates money to different groups that are generally opposing nuclear energy in Japan. So it's very interesting that sometimes people get to the inside. The more knowledge you have of some things, in some cases, generally for us, in terms of radiation in the environment, even after the accident, what we found actually has made us less worried. Most of our members, the core members, we say, oh, okay, it's not as bad as it could have been. It's not as bad as we thought. Let's just keep an eye on it. Now we know what to pay attention to. In other cases, like plutonium fuel cycles, sodium-cooled reactors, in a seismically active zone, this could cause a researcher to sound the alarm and say, this is really a bad idea from an engineering standpoint, if nothing else. So, and you need these kinds of people to really exert the right kind of pressure on this. So, I don't know what'll happen. I think little by little, more reactors will be turned back on in Japan. I think a few will probably be not turned on because they can't pass the seismic test because they're old. But I think gradually we'll have more turned on. So whether or not that fast breeder will be turned on or not, I think will be an issue. But I have a feeling there will be more opposition to turning that on than some of the other reactors for all of these reasons. So what can we say? We can hope. Yes. Yes?
I have two questions. One is, if you have your own device
Yeah.
and you register,
Mm-hmm.
can you track down only your routes?
No, everything, all the data that anybody has ever uploaded to our site, anybody can see. And you can search it, and you can, download.
Oh yeah, I meant, it could be like open to everyone.
Everybody.
But could you, because like your device, you know your number, your code, can you
Yeah.
like type in your code and then see
Oh
where
yeah, you can
went?
see just yours.
Oh,
You can
okay.
see just yours. What have you done lately? And the process, is we've thought through this a lot, and we're constantly revising and updating, the system. But basically, in your Nano, and presently there's a small memory card, SD card, and you take the data from that, and you upload it to our web system, and you can see right away the map of what you measured, and you can check to see if this is what you want. For instance, if you fly in a plane and you get these very high, well, we don't want to put that on our map, but you might want to keep it, just for your own reason. Or maybe you might have done that one by mistake or something. So you can check, and then you can say, yes, this is the data I want. You put in the information, where it was, how high the sensor was, etc. Some basic metadata for that. And then you submit it. And then about 6 volunteers get an automatic email that someone has submitted data, and one of us will check it to make sure there's no clear errors, like it's on an airplane or something, and then we'll approve it, and it'll go on the map, and will usually be available within 24 hours on our web map. So when it's busy, I might be checking 20 uploads in a day. Weekends are the busiest time. People always on Sunday, they're uploading everything on Sunday because they have a day off. So, and you can look at your own, you can look at other people's. Another thing that I want to point out is for the data collection system, people can do it anonymously. And we have volunteers in places where maybe, the government doesn't really want them to do that. Countries in Africa, some other countries. So you don't have to put your name. All you need is a valid email address. And when we get that, we get your user ID and the device number ID, and so we can know, we can keep track of it that way, but we don't have to know anything else about the people. This is something that some of the people I mentioned, like at IAEA, they would raise questions about. Well, what's to stop someone from intentionally uploading bad data, especially if they're anonymous? And it's an issue. So we hope to, counter that with education and outreach and community, activity. But we think it's important that people be able to participate anonymously in this.
And also, I was wondering, like, since you guys are neutral stance on nuclear power, can others cite you as I don't know, like if they are anti-nuclear power, can they cite you guys and use your data in there?
Anybody can use it for anything, you know, really. It could be an anti-nuclear group, it could be the government, anybody. The data is open and available. So, you know, we have no control over what anybody would use it for. And you could imagine someone would say, see, we told you the radiation is too high, you know, and that supports our anti-nuclear stance. Or someone else could show the same data and say, see, we told you the radiation is low and that supports our pro-nuclear stance. So this will happen. We expect that that kind of thing is going to happen. In our own statements, we're very, very careful to be as accurate as possible, to verify everything, to fact-check everything, and to not try to put any spin on it. If there is, like I mentioned, our agenda is about openness. We will criticize official efforts, government efforts, usually on the basis of lack of transparency, or issues of accuracy, or issues of usability on those things. But we don't try to link that to any political, we're not politically active, you know. So, but you're right, someone could use it for whatever they want. And we have had difficulty, you know, there are other groups out there who have looked at Safecast and said, oh, we want to do the same thing. And there was a group in the United States, and very enthusiastic, and this person went on television, you know, international television, saying, we are working with Safecast. And they're not. And this is a very strongly anti-nuclear group who actually says really crazy, irresponsible things. Like, recently radiation levels in Taiwan are increasing, and that's because of radiation from Fukushima, which is total nonsense. Absolute nonsense, irresponsible, false information. And they do this constantly. And we don't have any interest in getting into a kind of public fight with those people, but we sort of emails us, please, we're not working together. Don't tell people we're working together. You know, you do your thing, we do ours, you know. But they keep trying to do that. It's frustrating. So at least we published our guidelines for data reliability, which include what I said. We can track every device. We know the specifications of every device. You know, the data has to be in a format that includes the time and GPS. And, you know, it needs to be reviewed by some knowledgeable volunteer for data quality. And other things like that. And the biggest thing is that it has to be open. The whole system has to be open. And this other group said, oh, we're open. In other words, oh, we're open. But you can't download the data unless you send them a personal email. And there's no information about the hardware, how their system works anywhere on the website. So a lot of people don't get the whole idea of being open and how radical, you know, that really is. They'll say, oh, we're open. You know, ask us anything. No, that's not open. People need to be able to get that without even asking. It needs to be out there in the public domain for anybody to get without asking. Yes?
Speaking about accuracy of data, how can you ensure that elevation or distance from the ground that can affect the level of radiation?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we teach people how to use them, when we in our manual for using the kit, when we do workshops and teach people, we ask them to measure at 1 meter height, which is the right height to take environmental readings, and to keep it in the case, with the case closed, because this case acts as a good beta shield. So at 1 meter height, you'll be getting a good measurement primarily of gamma, and 1 meter is the right height. What people don't understand, maybe you understand, is cesium has both beta and gamma radiation. And the sensor is much more sensitive to beta. If you put it on the ground, it'll be getting swamped with lots of beta radiation. That's not really representing the gamma radiation. If you hold it at 1 meter, you'll be getting almost only gamma radiation. And there's a lot of other reasons why 1 meter is the appropriate height. So we saw lots of people, putting their guide panels on the ground. Look, it's 5 microsieverts or something. That's wrong. It's wrong. There's a lot of beta radiation. We should know that, but it shouldn't be given in microsieverts. It should be given in counts per minute or some other measurement or an area measurement, becquerels per square meter. But the dose of microsievert is about the damage to a person. And that calibration is all done from the height of 1 meter. So you're right. We ask people to do it. In our metadata, there's a place where they indicate how high the sensor was. And actually, between about 800, 80 centimeters and maybe 1.5 meters is okay. The variation is not so high. But if they're measuring at 50 centimeters or on the ground, we want to know. And then we'll look at it, and we may decide not to put it on the map. So if someone wants to lie about it, they can lie about it. And we can't stop them. But that brings up the other issue, which is redundancy. And especially in Japan and in places like Fukushima and certainly Tokyo, where lots of people are measuring a lot, very often, going again and again and again. If you have one data point that's an outlier, it's too high, maybe they put it on the ground, it's an outlier. Well, if people go back again and again, eventually that will average out and be more representative. But it's an issue, and people will make mistakes, and they'll forget, and definitely that kind of thing will happen. A bigger issue is people will send it through an X-ray machine. We've had people who are taking measurements on the way to take a plane, and they'll put it in their luggage, and they'll go through the X-ray, and we'll get this really high radiation. And actually, I showed you the map of Rome. There's 2 places on the map in Rome where the person who measured sent it through an X-ray. One was at a museum, and one was entering another place in the Vatican, and there's a big spike of radiation. And well, we talk about it, should we not include that data? And we're working on a way that we can filter that kind of thing out. But we don't want to censor the data. And we don't want anyone to say, oh, they're just picking which ones to use. So we want to include everything that we can, but we hope that people tell us there was an X-ray machine, for instance, so we can take some editing to that. Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah.
So thanks again for the presentation, Aspi. And you've mentioned there's about more than 400 devices around the world. And I don't know, it might be just me, but I thought the number 400 number itself is not as promising as, if you think about the lower price of this. So is it because of the low demand from the people in Japan, or what do you think the reason, or is it about technical issues for having a hard time providing a lot of quantity at the same time for the device?
There's a comparison.
Yeah.
There's a person that we've talked to and gotten to know a little bit in Ishinomaki who has sold very low-cost radiation detectors for about 5,000 yen.
Yeah.
And he's sold a couple of thousand of them.
Okay.
And it's definitely the price, and that's the price that a person, a family, could say, yes, let's just get one just in case, and it's easy to make that decision. And they also have a system to upload data, but it's closed. Okay. You have to buy the thing to do it. So price is a big issue, and how you're going to use it. A lot of people think, it's nice to have something like this in case of an emergency. They'll measure a little bit at first, and then, okay, I see what it is, and then they won't use it. So price is one issue. We think, maybe it would be nice if it was half the price or something. Maybe there'd be more people doing it. But it's hard to get the price much below this and still have it to be a kit. If it was mass-produced in a factory in China, it would be cheaper. And we actually have a design that maybe we'll have produced, maybe we won't, which could be useful for other things like the fixed sensors, for instance. But we intentionally make this available as a kit because of all the human interaction and talking and helping that involves. We think it's much better that this is a kit. And it would be nice if it was a little cheaper. The other thing is you don't actually have to buy the kit from Safecast or from, there's a company called International Medcom, whose president is one of our good supporters, and we use some of their parts in this, and they actually sell it online. But you don't have to buy it. All the plans and the parts list is available online. The plans for the circuit board, you can get that made. All the plans for the plastic parts, you can get those cut. And somebody, about 2 or 3 months ago, wrote a review. They had gotten all the parts themselves and built one, and it works great. And he said, you know what? I didn't save any money doing it that way. The price was the same if you do it yourself as opposed to buying a kit. So it's an issue. We don't want to be in the sales business. We don't want to be a company that's like doing that. I mean, that's not our aim. But you're right. Maybe more would be sold if they were cheaper. But it'll be interesting to find out if more would be used. What will it take for the society to be saturated? Where everybody who might want to do this is doing it. Maybe in a year or two we'll know. I think. One more thing I wanted to say, and this is actually Professor Eckert, when he was talking about his experience measuring around the nuclear plant. We do have a lot of interest and a lot more contact with people from various groups active, for instance, in the United States. There's an organization called the National Resource Defense Council, the NRDC, in the United States. It's an NPO that's been established for more than 30 years, I think. And they provide legal assistance to groups and individuals who want to push legal action against government or power companies or polluters, etc. And they have a strong activity in nuclear energy issues, and they have a lot of contact with groups that are trying to monitor nuclear plants and nuclear waste, etc. So we did a workshop. They sponsored a workshop in Washington, D.C. back in March, I guess, or maybe it was April this year. It was great. A lot of groups, Greenpeace, Friends of Earth, several other big groups like that attended, several small regional groups, representatives attended, and also people from Department of Energy. One person, actually the person who was actually flying over Fukushima to do the first flights, and also someone from Homeland Security, domestic nuclear, monitoring. These people participated, and we got those people to sit down together and build detectors, which never happens because they're adversaries usually. And then they went out together around Washington and measured radiation in Washington, D.C. And it was interesting because the guy from the Department of Energy, they had also flown over Washington, D.C. and took measurements, and they said, there's a hot spot on the Washington, D.C. Mall. Let's see if we can find it. And they found it. It was the National World War II Memorial, which is made with granite. It's a very big, it's almost the size of a sports field, covered with granite, and that is like high like Chiba or Rome. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that there are more and more groups in the United States who have gotten big IDs, and this was really kind of kicked off by this NRDC, and we're getting more and more measurements from people who belong to these groups who are doing exactly what he was doing, going around the nuclear plants and just measuring. And because, for instance, the DOE and the NRC have basically accepted and approved the BGEIGI system, this will make them much more willing to accept the radiation data that those groups present if they want to discuss problems or even go into a law court. So this for us is a very important thing. And again, it's not our purpose. We're not saying, we want more people to measure around nuclear plants, but yes, if you want to use this to do that, that's a great way to use it, and it's certainly something worthwhile.
Any more questions?
Some more? The same people
one
talking.
more
Yeah.
question was that,
Yeah.
sorry, hold on. So I'll ask you later, yeah.
when you remember. Yeah, happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody else? Yes?
I was just wondering about the map. Since all the data is scattered at different times,
Yes.
when you have the extrapolating averages between the data
Right,
points,
right.
how do you deal with the varying ages of the data points?
Yeah. It remains one of our big assignments to do a good visualization that shows the change over time. At the moment, it's averaged and interpolated, and like I said, you can query data points at any location and you can see the measurements over time. And actually, one of our volunteers who had done an earlier map has a web map online where you can see the graph of the change at any one point. But we'd really like to figure out a good way to show this over time, some kind of simple slider animation. Because it is less and less, and maybe the first glance at the map may overstate some of the levels in some areas because of that. But basically anybody can query any point and see the change. Do you work on that kind of thing?
No.
Too bad. We have some really good map people. The guy who did our iOS application and then the web map that I was showing, his name is Nick Dolzai, and he lives in Montana in the United States, and none of us have ever met him. But he's great, he's brilliant. We'll say, wouldn't it be nice if we had, for instance, a way to query the map to get the reading off? Like a day later, oh, I have that implemented. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a way to do the natural background, to show the natural background? And he said, sure. So in a day, he had that implemented. So he's a really great mapping GIS person with a strong knowledge of radiation. We're really lucky to have him, and we've never met him. We joke that he's a head in a jar somewhere, connected to a computer, because we don't know. Probably is. Yeah, someone else? How's our time?
Oh,
Getting there? Getting close?
Okay. Last 5, yeah, please.
Yes.
Do you have any active students in your?
Some. We'd be happy to have more. We'd be happy to have interns for a few different things. One of the more interesting student groups came out of a workshop we did in Koriyama last year at a technical college, a Senmon Gakko, that had started a program for radiation measurement. And we did a workshop to build with about 16 students, and that was great. So we'd like to have more activity from students. There's a lot of things that we could always use help with. I mean, that's the thing. We're happy to have volunteers from anybody, It's not like you have to show up all the time or anything. Like I said, we're kind of freewheeling, but if someone is interested, definitely we'd like to have students. I could particularly use an intern to help me with some of my research. That's one of the things I do a lot, is going through collating research. What's the latest findings on health? What's the latest findings on, ocean? What's the latest findings on animals, So I have tons and tons of data that I'm getting and organizing, but I need help organizing that better. So, and we have other things we can always use help with. If someone is, even if you're not good at building things, I don't know if I mentioned, usually when we do workshops for building, half of the people have never used a soldering iron before, handagote. They've never done it before. They're total novices. At the end of the day, they've completed it and it works, and they feel like they've really accomplished something, have a new skill. Because it's a bit of a challenging thing. I mean, when you start, you'll never have soldered before. By the time you finish, you're an expert at soldering. So it's really, there's a lot of ways for people who don't have experience to participate as well. So it'd be really good if anybody wants to. Are you going to volunteer? Especially if you keep going up to Fukushima, you should definitely bring a big ID.
I'll think about it.
Think about it. Okay.
Yeah,
Well.
then we officially close our seminar, and maybe there are some comment sheets at the entry. Are there?
Yeah.
No.